Seit 9 Tagen ist das neue Minecraft BOTW-Video draußen. Wir müssen reagieren. Intro, Intro, Intro. Hallöchen, meine lieben Freunde, und herzlich willkommen zu einer neuen Reaction und dem mittlerweile 6. Part, glaube ich, von BOTW wird in Minecraft nachgebaut. Wir haben bereits 5 Mal auf diese Folgen vom guten Grazi reagiert und seit 9 Tagen ist jetzt die nächste Folge draußen und ihr habt mir wirklich schon viel in den Livestream-Chat und in die Insta-DMs geschrieben, Hübi, da ist was. Und Freunde, wir gucken es uns jetzt an. Aber bevor wir das machen, noch eine ganz kleine Ankündigung für den 8. Dezember. Das ist zur Aufnahme des Videos in 2 Tagen. Für die Credits, Freunde, We Are Building All of Breath of the Wild Minecraft Rito Village von Grazi, vor 9 Tagen rausgekommen. Link wie immer natürlich in der Beschreibung. Schauen wir uns an, was der Meister produziert. Und das erste, was mir auffällt, er hat jetzt einen Greenscreen. Das hat er davor noch nicht, oder? Let's go.
We all know the drill at this point. For nearly 2 years now, I've been working to build all of
Oder man sieht jetzt hier diesen kleinen Sneak Peek, ne? Aber ich will mich noch nicht zu viel spoilern lassen.
Roughly half the map. I'll be honest, after finishing Gerudo, I was feeling a little burnt out from the project, so it probably...
Ich kann voll nachvollziehen, dass man sich da, sag ich mal, burnt out fühlt. Weil, wenn du so ein Riesenprojekt machst, ne, und das Ziel immer noch in so weiter Entfernung liegt, dann ist das irgendwann echt übel. Wenn du anfängst, hast du noch diese Anfangsmotivation und irgendwann, nachdem du dann die ersten 20-30% geschafft hast und schon wirklich viel Energie reingesteckt hast, hast du immer noch mehr als die Hälfte vor dir und denkst so, Alter, wann soll das jemals ein Ende nehmen? Aber er zieht weiter durch. Es ist sehr beeindruckend.
Be smart to take it easy with this episode. Maybe I should do an easier region of the map, or just build a smaller area this time. Or how about I do the Ridgeland, Tabantha, and all of Hebra?
Er nimmt einfach die komplette Region. Mit den Schneebergen, mit dem Labyrinth oben. Da ist, glaube ich, auch das Fossil ist da noch dabei. Ach du Scheiße.
Making this the biggest episode yet. Cool, great idea, me. This gives us a lot to do in this episode. Just to name some of the locations we have to build, we have to do Satori Mountain, Rito Village, Va Meadow, the Hebra Great
ich freue mich so drauf. Ja, das ist das so Ziel.
And the Forgotten Temple. And that's not even
Stimmt, der
everything.
vergessene Tempel ist ja auch noch da. Da kriegt man die Belohnung, wenn man alle 120 Schreine gespielt
I
hat.
thought I was up to the task, but things were gonna be different this time around. The project had changed since finishing Gerudo, and I hadn't realized it yet. I was about to face a new challenge on the map that I had not expected, and yet I was oblivious to it, and naively started working, not knowing I was walking into the most difficult part of the project yet.
Okay, also er hat gesagt, dass sich jetzt das Projekt seit der Gerudo-Wüste massiv verändert hat und er wusste das nicht. Ich bin sehr gespannt. Gibt es vielleicht irgendwelche technischen Probleme? Weiß nicht, macht Minecraft irgendwie Probleme, wenn man zu viel baut oder so? Ich habe keine Ahnung.
But for now, I began
Oder er hat vielleicht ein Skalierungsproblem. Das kann auch sein. Wobei, nee, er hat es eigentlich davor gut ausgerichtet. Wir gucken weiter.
On Satori Mountain. After placing in all of the trees that span across the area, I dove into terraforming the peaks of the mountain. In Breath of the Wild, the peak is split into multiple overhanging rocks, so I had to terraform those here. There was some other light terraforming around the mountain to be done, but not very much. Before doing anything else, I figured that I should probably figure out a block palette to use for the cliffs. Satori Mountain has these very sandy looking rocks, so the usual stone palette just wasn't going to work here. I experimented with different gradients, and after finding one that consisted of stripped wood and sandstone...
Das sieht tatsächlich sehr gut aus, das stimmt. Habe ich gar nicht drüber nachgedacht, aber ja, bei Satori Mountain ist alles so beige, leicht grünlich, ne, so in die Richtung. Da ist eigentlich nicht viel mit grauem Stein.
I painted the entire mountain with it. Now, there isn't really much to build around Satori Mountain, so I was pretty much able to go straight to the top and build the cherry blossom. This tree wasn't anything too special since it's pretty much just a regular tree recolored to pink, so it didn't take too long to build, especially with the help of Goat and Ombrains. Mojang added cherry blossom leaves at literally the perfect time though, so thanks for that, Mojang. I then made a Walmart brand Lord of the Mountain to cap
das kam jetzt frisch dazu, ne?
Actually ended up working pretty well. It's the Lord of the Mountain, you guys can't argue that. And moved back down the mountain to work on the final build of this region,
Voll geil.
the Sanardin Park ruins. Ombrains, Goat, and Ezio were there to help me with these ruins, so it ended up going pretty smoothly. We
Wie
struggled.
viele das einfach mittlerweile sind, ne? Also ich sehe da jetzt gerade 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Leute, die daran arbeiten. Es ist so cool, dass der das Ding alleine gestartet hat und sich da mittlerweile so ein cooles Team drumherum gebildet hat. Mega schön, das zu
Figure out
sehen.
whether to use dark oak or deep slate for the walkways here, but ended up settling on dark oak after a heated discussion. And as I finished up the front of the ruins, the others were battling it out to come up with a design for the horse statue. And some of the designs were better than others. Wait, who made this? Is that Celios? Did you make that? Why has it only got 3 legs? Good question. The next day, we ended up settling on Ombrain's design for the statue, and after that, it was time to put in the final touches for the
Steht da unten ein T-Rex? Warum zur Hölle steht da ein T-Rex?
mountain. At this point, it seems like things are going pretty smoothly. We already have this quick and easy start to the episode. But in reality, Satori Mountain proved to be extremely difficult for me to work on. It sounds ridiculous. This looks like a nice and simple build that's not too crazy or difficult. But that was the problem. It wasn't difficult. At this point, the project had become pretty much the same thing over and over again. Put these trees in place, terraform this rock, paste in these ruins, and it just wasn't very fun to build anymore. The part of the map we've built so far was very dense and packed full of interesting builds, but the stuff we're getting into now, there's just not as much of that. It's mostly just empty terrain. Seeing that I still had half of it left to go killed off a lot of my motivation. And just like that, I found myself incredibly burnt out. I was exhausted.
Krass. Sein größtes Problem ist, dass es nicht herausfordernd genug ist. Dass es zu leicht ist. Das ist spannend zu beobachten.
From the map at this point, especially after having just built the Great Sky Island from Tears of the Kingdom. And so I decided it was time to take my first official break from the project. I needed to take some time and think. How could I find enjoyment in the map again? Weeks passed and I still had no answer, but it had already been months since my last episode. I needed to get back to work. So I pulled out a temporary solution. If it wasn't fun to build on the map anymore, how about I just force it to be fun? By live streaming it. Moving into the Ridgeland, my next goal was Thunder Plateau, and I was gonna live stream my way there. I started with the bridge that connects Satori Mountain up to the Ridgeland. It was a nice, simple build to help get me back into the project. In the background as well, you could see that Ombrains is working on the Cast Shrine quest with the stone rings. Now that I was properly connected up to the Ridgeland, I could start making my way towards Thunder Plateau.
Ich bin so gespannt, wie diese ganzen Pilze hinbekommt, ne?
But there's like nothing between here and there, so I could pretty much just start now. But first, I decided to build the large mushroom trees that cover this area. I got the first one down with the assistance of Goat, using a mix of oak wood, birch wood, and moss blocks. Later, I came back to make some more variations of the trees.
Doch,
The sizes of these trees
raus.
vary a lot, so I really had to make some at different scales. I held off on putting the trees in place for now, as I wanted to finish Thunder Plateau first. But this build turned out to be a lot simpler than I first imagined it being. The wall design was something I already built in Farron, so I just had to translate it into this wonky shape. Up top, the 4 pillars were also something that I designed.
Ist das Donnerplateau wirklich so unförmig? Also ich dachte irgendwie immer, dass das halt einfach ein großer Kreis wäre, ne? Aber das ist alles bloß kein Kreis.
And in Farron, so I just had to translate it to the new angle. Afterwards, I went through and put all of the mushroom trees in place, really trying to make sure that they were all accurately placed. Ombrains also added a bunch of plant life to the waters around the plateau, which really helped to elevate the feeling of the area. Since I was in the area,
Das Ding ist halt, was man jetzt hier gerade gesehen hat, es ist halt hier in Minecraft super viel Wasser. Und dadurch wirkt es gefühlt wie ein halber See oder ein Ozean. Und in Breath of the Wild ist es ja wirklich nur so eine ganz dünne Wasserschicht. Lässt sich jetzt in Minecraft bloß nicht anders darstellen. Dafür haben sie es ganz gut hinbekommen. Aber ich finde, das wirkt gerade einfach eher wie ein Tümpel oder ein kleiner See oder sowas. Aber ja, also es lässt sich halt tatsächlich nicht anders darstellen in Minecraft.
Since I was in the area, I figured I might as well build the Breach of Demise as well. A large ravine with white, jagged rocks piercing out of the cliffside.
Oh, stimmt. Die haben ja wirklich überall so wie so kleine Löcher dran. Da bin ich auch gespannt, wie er das macht.
I added in all of the spiked rocks to start, using a new plugin to do the job very ineffectively. But it got it done in the end. As for the color of the cliffs, that was the harder part. We argued on my stream for ages trying to find the perfect color. The rocks here had these divots with darker sections to them, which became the main point of contention. Eventually, though, I came up with a big brain world edit trick to make them look a bit more integrated with the cliff, which finally solved the problem. After that, the breach was mostly finished.
Das sieht wirklich gut aus. Wie immer finde ich, dass in Minecraft alles ein bisschen zu hell rüberkommt. Aber das Problem hatten wir auch schon in der Gerudo-Wüste. Ich glaube, das ist auch ein Shader-Problem. Ich glaube, mit Shader-Packs, der hat ja hier ein Shader-Pack drin, wirkt alles immer heller, weil quasi die Sonne das reflektiert. Aber wie gesagt, das wissen wir. Da hat sich mein Handy gerade verabschiedet. Das kennen wir schon aus der Gerudo-Wüste.
The ravine. And after building a small bit of ruins nearby, another section of the map had fallen. Moving into this part of the ridgeland, there's not really anything interesting to cover, so I'll skip over most of it. We did, however, have to build up the Blood Moon Shrine and Cass's house up above it. I put in the shrine and pedestal down below before getting started on Cass's house up above. This house is very similar to the Rito Village designs, so we'll be building some similar structures later on. Moving above Tanagar Canyon, Ezio would...
Was ist das schon wieder für ein lila Ding, was die da hingepackt haben? Ich erkenn's nicht mal. Wie die überall diese bunten Easter Eggs immer hinpacken, weil denen beim Bauen wahrscheinlich einfach langweilig wird, ne?
Working on the Tabantha Great Bridge off and on for the next couple of weeks. He began with a basic outline before getting started on some of the more detailed bits on this end here. The bridge has a lot of hanging pieces of wood coming down from the bridge, so he added those up using fences and fence gates. It took some time to add in all of these hanging pieces of wood and designing the bridge, but in the end it was working.
Es sieht
Once he was
richtig
finished,
gut
I
aus.
helped to add a couple of the final details, and the bridge was complete. Now that we were connected to Tabantha, I colored all of the cliffs to match the sandy color we...
Es ist wirklich so, als ob du mit so einem Malroller, ne, mit dem du Wände bemalst, so einfach über diese Felswände gehst. Das sieht so geil aus, als ob Gott einfach so
But the
pinseln
first
würde.
real build I wanted to tackle at Tabantha was Dinral. Despite belonging to the Elden region, this canyon is the only good place to build the dragon. Every other location it flies through is just completely out of the way. I started by figuring out the rough shape I wanted the dragon to have, but the final draft would end up having to be upscaled further down the line. And the easy stuff is over. This is where it gets difficult. Working on Dinral was...
Ja, aber er hat ja gesagt, er mag es, wenn es schwer ist. Also müsste er sich eigentlich freuen, dass er jetzt eine komplexe Bauaufgabe hat.
pretty intimidating, especially the head. That mane and those horns were pretty scary looking to build. But luckily, Shovel was there to help us out. And you might be
Shovel.
asking why a gardening tool is trying to help me build a dragon. Well, let's just say that Shovel had some qualifications.
Digga. Das hat er alles gebaut? Jo. Mashallah. Talentierter Bilder.
Shovel bit the bullet and instantly started work on the head. He got a good shape down pretty quickly and tackled the horns right after. It took some time to get the proper shape down before he rounded it off with stairs, walls, etc. Meanwhile, I was working on the bulk of the body, adding the spikes to the dragon's back, marking the start of the legs, and painting the underbelly. Soon enough, the dragon was ready to be colored in, and we chose a few different palettes for the underbelly and back. The more difficult of my responsibilities, however, included keeping the goofy goober under control. Oh god, what does he want now? I feel like Celios is up to something. Celios, what are you doing? Wait, did Celios place the emeralds? Did Celios do this?
Bruder.
He did. Here, I'm gonna show you something. Whenever Celios is being annoying, there's a simple command you can do. Next, Shovel was working on the mane, as well as adding in some final touches to the head. His design for the mane really had me rethinking how we did the two for the other dragons we
Oh
built.
mein Gott. Wie krass das aussieht. Es sieht wirklich so aus, als ob da so richtig viele weiße Haare und so richtig buschiges Fell wären. Das sind einfach Steinblöcke, die da
I had
platziert
begun
wurden.
work on the legs around the same time, which is something that I've always struggled with. But with some pointers from Shovel and the help of Alfie and Ownbrains, we were slowly making progress. As we gradually finished the claws, Shovel was adding these flames to the side of Dinral's head, which really helped make the dragon feel more fiery.
Digga.
And after putting in some of the final touches,
Ey, ne, also wirklich ganz viel Liebe an Grazi. Also der Typ baut ja geisteskrank und der koordiniert das ganze Projekt und Riesenrespekt. Aber was sein Kollege Shovel da an diesem Kopf von dem Drachen macht, anderes Level. Das sieht insane aus.
Dinral was complete. After the 6-hour Dinral stream, I was pretty tired, and the streams halted almost completely to a standstill. They had gotten me pretty far, but they couldn't carry me the whole way to victory. As I mentioned earlier, this was just a temporary solution, because, as it turns out, you can get burnt out of live streaming too. And just like that, the live streams began to slow down. But they had gotten me rolling on the map again, and progress was being made. I hoped that this progress would snowball, and I'd get fully back into the groove of working on the project again. But no, I'm not a snowball rolling down a hill. I was pushing up the hill, because the worst of the episode was still yet to come. But for now, let's focus
Die
on getting
Hebra-Region,
to
oder? Die ganzen Schneeberge, da oben ist gar nichts los. Allgemein, das habe ich auch in meinem 100% Stream-Projekt gemerkt, wo ich ja wirklich BOTW zu 100%, glaube ich, in 9 Tagen am Stück durchgespielt habe. Sobald du in Breath of the Wild in irgendeine Schneeregion kommst, wird's einfach nur brutal langweilig, weil die sind wirklich nicht sehr ereignisreich ausgestaltet.
Village. Along the path to Rito Village were some large overhanging rocks and some ancient Hylian ruins. A couple of Guardian Skywatchers were also roaming around the area, but I came up with a design for the Skywatchers like a year ago, so I quickly put those in place. On the hills above, there was another set of Hylian ruins called the Ancient Columns that corresponded with one of the hidden memories. These ruins didn't take too long though, as they were pretty much just copy-paste.
Da ist, glaube ich, die Erinnerung, wo, glaube ich, Zelda Link anschreit, glaube ich. Weil er ihr in dem Moment auf den Sack geht, aber sie lässt einfach nur ihren Frust an ihm raus.
That was another great fairy fountain, but again, we've already designed these, so I just had to recolor it and add in some new rocks around it. The Ridgeland Tower also sits nearby, surrounded with more ancient Hylian ruins. All the ruins were just the same pillar design though, so I just had to copy-paste it around. With the help of some new building tools, I was also able to quickly terraform some more overhangs into the mountain before going back through to add in all of the
Voll krass, was mit diesen ganzen Minecraft-Plugins alles möglich ist, ne? Wie schnell die das alles machen. Das ist so... Survival Minecraft ist einfach gefühlt ein anderes Spiel als Creative Minecraft.
Around the tower. I ended up adding more of these overhanging cliffs to the rest of the region, which really helped to make the mountainsides look better. With the Rito Islands in sight, I started painting all of the cliffs to the right color, using the same gradient from Satori Mountain. There isn't much in this area though. I pasted in another stable and finished up some more of the ruins in this area, but they were much of the same stuff from earlier. I also built Warbler's Nest behind the village, which was small but pretty cool. And just like that, Rito Village was upon me. Despite my boredom from the project, this was something I was looking forward to. Starting with the large Rito rock, it took some trial and error to get the shape down properly. The entire thing felt
subscribe to, wahrscheinlich subscribe to Grazi, oder?
Then I shortened the rock a bit, and all of the problems were...
Ihr könnt aber auch hier auf dem Kanal abonnieren. Aber abonniert dann auch drüben bei Grazi. Ich fühle mich immer ein bisschen schlecht, wenn ich auf seine Videos reagiere, ne?
Just magically fixed. In the end, I think it turned out pretty accurate. I also took the time to put in these other rock pillars in the lake, but come on, no one cares about those. Soon enough, I began work on the basic outline for the village, which was honestly pretty tricky. Getting the scale and height down took some time to figure out. I also got pretty hung up on how to make the railings for the long walkway, since they needed to be thin but with enough space to still walk on the platforms. Eventually, Go and Toby helped me realize that I was overcomplicating things, and I ended up using regular fences and trapdoors. I took the time to fix up the smaller designs sprinkled throughout the village, such as these archways. I also used this opportunity to try out the new pots for the first time. For the designs, I chose the archery shard, since the Ritos are archers, and the friend shard, since the Rito are friendly or something, I don't know. Moving on to the actual buildings, I started with the inn.
Hier sind die ganzen neuen Minecraft-Items drin, die frisch reingekommen sind, ne? Die kenne ich alle gar nicht.
I unfortunately lost the replay mod file for, but luckily I still had this raw footage. It was definitely the most fun building in the village, and helped me to establish what kind of blocks to use for the town. After putting it in place, I also finished the interior, as well as utilizing my pot design.
Mit dem Teppich und mit den Töpfen sieht das voll nice aus.
Building in the entire village, which acted as the housing units for the Rito, as well as the shops. The design is similar to Cass's house from earlier, so I based it on that. It took some trial and error to finish up, but I got there in the end. After that, I put all the buildings into their proper spots.
Das ist immer so cool, wie er immer quasi seine Blaupausen, ne, seine Vorlagen so einfach so drumherum schwebend in den Raum baut. Und dann copy-pastet er immer alles rein.
I also built Rivali's landing near the top, along with this extra chunk of the rock. Finally, I worked on the plateau that holds up the Rito Village Shrine. I had to terraform the top of the rock, which didn't take too long, before designing the bridge across and the small platform on the rock. Rito Village is pretty small, so it was already almost done. I just had to finish up all of the interiors, which were knocked out pretty quickly considering the small scale of the houses. I used a lot of colorful wood blocks like trapdoors and stairs to design a lot of the seats and the hammocks, as well as using the new...
Ja, es kommt voll gut rüber. Also so Rito Village ist ja allgemein ein bisschen bunter, würde ich sagen. Ist so neben Hateno auf jeden Fall einer der bunteren Orte in Breath of the Wild. Und das kommt sehr gut rüber mit diesen hellblauen Teppichen, mit diesem, ja, fast schon so rosanem Holz, was er verwendet. Kommt sehr geil, kommt sehr, sehr cool.
Bookshelf block. Back outside, however, there were still some final touches to make. I finally lit the village up with some lanterns and added proper support beams to hold up the platforms. Out front, I tinkered with the design for a hut that Goat had made earlier before experimenting with the final block palette a bit more. I felt like there was too much dark oak in the mix, so I ended up adding a splash of spruce wood to it. Funnily enough, I ended off with the bridges that act as the entrance to the island. These weren't too tricky to make as they all had the same design. I also added some trees to the island and did some last minute.
Und da ist sogar so ein kleiner Teich auf diesen Insel vorne, glaube ich, wo Fische drin sind, ne? Schau mal, da oben steht sogar so ein ganz kleiner Vamedo. Da haben sie so einen ganz Mini-Vamedo hingesetzt. Ja, wie cool. Ey, diese Easter Eggs immer zu suchen, macht so Spaß.
Even though it did go pretty fast. I was really excited to work on Va Meadow, but told myself that I should finish everything else first. Meadow would act as the light at the end of the episode, my motivating factor. Because I was heading into Hebra, which was pretty much the physical embodiment of everything I hated about the project.
Yeah.
But I have a theory. The problem with this area of the map is the lack of interesting builds. It's just not very fun to work on. And looking ahead to the rest of the project, it looks like it's going to stay that way for the rest of the map. However, finishing Tabantha and Hebra would bring me so much closer to the end of the project. And going into the next episode, the finale would be within sight. And I think that would be a huge boost of motivation for me. If I could just push through the rest of this region, I'd be in the end game of the project, and the slope would begin to even out. While I wanted to move on and work on something new and original, something of my own design, I couldn't leave this project now. I cannot allow myself to quit. So if I can't find a way around the burnout, then screw it.
Bruder, der Typ fasst gerade in diesem Video alles so gut zusammen, was diese ganzen Mod-Ersteller, egal für welches Spiel, ob für Minecraft, ob für Odyssey, ob für Mario Bros., was auch immer, was die alle für ein Problem haben. Die haben alle unfassbar gute erste Ideen für riesige Projekte, fangen mit einer riesen Motivation an, schaffen die ersten 10-20% richtig fix, sind voll motiviert und irgendwann merkt man, shit, ich mache das eigentlich gerade alles for free. Das ist nicht mein Job. Ich krieg kein Geld dafür. Er kriegt jetzt sogar ein bisschen Geld dafür durch seine Videos und Streams, was ihm auch gegönnt ist. Na, aber diese ganzen Mod-Ersteller nehmen alle so krasse Projekte vor sich, aber nehmen sich dann meistens was vor, was mindestens 1 bis 2 Jahre Arbeit braucht. Und über 1 bis 2 Jahre diese Motivation oben zu halten, an etwas zu arbeiten, was dir quasi im Leben faktisch nichts bringt, weil das ist nicht dein Job, du kriegst kein Geld dafür. Das ist heavy und das ist der Tod für 80 bis 90% aller geilen Mod-Projekte, weil die Modder sich immer übernehmen oder selbst wenn sie sich nicht übernehmen, so lange an etwas arbeiten müssen, was ihnen kein Geld bringt, dass dann irgendwann die Frage kommt, warum mache ich das eigentlich? Er beschreibt gerade so perfekt den Struggle aller Mod-Ersteller.
I'm just gonna push through it. I'm going to prove that I have the strength to endure it. Prove that I won't give up on this project. I knew from the moment I started this that I was going to make it to the end and deliver the map that you've all wanted for years. This is taking too long. It's time for a big push. We still have to finish all of Hebra, and it's not going to be easy. But I don't really care anymore. The adversary isn't the map. It's myself.
Bruder, jetzt wird's aber motivierend hier. Jetzt geht's ja aber richtig los. Es ist immer so weird, das Game ohne Texture Pack und Shader bei ihm zu sehen.
Enemy camps in the area, and there were huge chunks of the mountain missing, which I had to fill in. Just nearby was the first secret hot spring, which I built up pretty quickly. Hauziki would later come by as well to make them look even nicer with some particles. Apart from that, the west side of Hebra is pretty empty, except for, of course, the Hebra Great Skeleton. The mountain above the skeleton was just completely missing.
Ohne Scheiß. Man sieht das und ich denke mir schon so, ja, so sieht's auch in Breath of the Wild aus. Das ist einfach gar nichts.
So I had to create the whole thing. With the mountain done, I finished up the entrance into the Great Skeleton Cavern. I painted the cave walls an icy blue color to match Breath of the Wild before starting on the skeleton. Its design is almost identical to the Gerudo skeleton we made in the last episode, so I was able to use pieces from that skeleton here. As for the head, structuring it all didn't end up taking too long. Again, it was almost the same as the Gerudo skeleton, so the experience from that one really helped me speed up the process here. After that, I built up the fins and the shoulder blades, which were small enough to not cause too much of a problem. The Hebra Great Skeleton was completed, and if you were wondering, here's what the finished product looks like with shaders on.
Lol.
Back outside, I finished up
Das
the
sah sehr
area
lost
by putting
aus.
all of the trees in place, which really helped to tie the area together. Most of the main mountain was also missing, so I had to take the time to build that up. The mountain has this large hole in it, which made the terraforming process a bit different than usual, so at least there was that. Again, there was a lot of simpler tasks in this area, like this river which needed work. I also built
Wie da oben in diese, hier
Again,
wieder
there was a
kein
lot of
Licht
simple
reinkommt,
tasks in
ne?
this area,
Und da einfach
like
so
this
dieses
river.
riesige schwarze Loch schwebt. Voll geil.
which needed work. I also built up the nearby Hebra Tower and fixed up the ruins that sit further below. Heading north along the trail, there is another stable and shrine duo, along with a bunch of smaller enemy camps. After once again adding in all of the trees, Hebra was starting to turn out quite beautiful. And with this mountain on the side finished up that contained some enemy camps and guardians, there was only one location left to build in Hebra. The Zonai Labyrinth already had a divot in the snow that marked out where the walls would go, so the scale was already set for me. Alfie, Toby, and I went through the entire outline, marking out where all the walls would go to start off. This took some time, but it was shockingly enjoyable work. The designs for the walls are consistent across all labyrinths, so I took the design from the Gerudo maze, changed the color, and tinkered with it a little bit. There were some different angles here, which meant I had
Wie
to
geil
readjust
das
some of the
aussieht.
designs,
Vor allem, weil
but
das jetzt wieder was ist, was sie so in so einem 45-Grad-Winkel bauen müssen, ne? Wo du nicht einfach das typisch Rechteckige nehmen kannst, was sonst Minecraft hat, sondern wo du immer so einen Block diagonal setzen musst.
it went pretty fast. I then spent a couple hours combing every inch of the maze to make sure it was completely accurate. And wow, Hebra is finally done. I skipped over some things and went pretty fast because there wasn't a lot of interesting stuff. With my low attention span and the burnout still plaguing me, it definitely was not the most fun region to build. But now we were so close to the end. Apart from Va Meadow, only one build remained, the Forgotten Temple. I quickly finished
Den stelle ich mir verdammt schwer zu bauen vor.
up the rest
Weil
of
ja alles
Tanagar
unterirdisch
Canyon
ist.
because there was pretty much nothing else here. I added some overhanging rocks to the cliffs, and Toby had already built the windmills that scattered the gorge earlier, so I put those in place. I also finished the golf minigame and this shrine behind the rocks before starting on the temple. I built up some of the pillars outside the temple first, which would end up appearing much more in the design for the bulk of the temple. As for the temple itself, I thought this would be a quick build, but it ended up taking quite a bit of time. I began designing the exterior of the temple
Geil, das
using
aussieht.
sandstone to match the beige color, which
dreh
ended
hohl.
up being a pretty limiting block palette. Regardless, I finished up the front entrance and moved up top to work on the roof. The roof is a simple copy-pasted design with a bunch of rocks and rubble sprinkled across. Moving on inside, Toby joined to help outline the interior. We took the time to lay out the whole structure
Das sieht so cool aus. Bin das nur ich oder sieht das unfassbar nice aus?
before we got to work on designing things. Toby worked on the lower floor of the temple while I got started on the walls, which utilizes the pillar we designed out front. I then worked on this broken bridge near the front of the temple and put the roof in place as well, which turned out to have an identical design to the top of the temple. I added some details to the floor of this room, but decided to save the other final touches for the end, because there's still this entire other room to go. It used all the same wall designs and everything, so it went pretty quick until I got to the back of the temple, where the large goddess statue awaits. I was hoping I could reuse the statue I made for my Skyloft video, but it was too large. So I began work on the new statue design on the 45-degree angle. It certainly was not easy. I haven't built many
Wie gesagt, er erwähnt es auch gerade wieder, ne? Dieser 45-Grad-Winkel. Der bumst dich immer wieder in Minecraft.
statues on a scale like this, so it was sort of a first. It took a lot of tinkering to get down right, and I had to change parts of the wall design to give me more room to work with. I then continued with the final touches to the temple, including some large rocks near the end. I then went through and added all the guardians in place, and draped some leaves across the rooms to act as vines. The finished temple ended up looking way cooler than I thought it would.
Ja, das sieht
And
wirklich
yes,
fett aus.
I know, I did forget to add the trees sticking out of the wall. I didn't realize until after I finished building for this episode. I'm gonna go back and do them later, because now everything in this region is complete. Everything except for Divine Beast Va Meadow. Finally,
Das Highlight!
the build I was looking forward to the most. I naively believed that this would be the simplest Divine Beast yet, but it turned out to be the most time-consuming. I started with the tail of the beast, but this first
Ich kann mir
draft
nicht vorstellen, dass das Vamedo leichter zu bauen ist als Vanaboris. Also Vanaboris war für mich, wir sehen es auch da gerade im Hintergrund, der größte What the fuck Moment. Also es gibt so Sachen, wo ich mir denke, das ist in Minecraft nicht machbar. Und Vanaboris ist sowas. Das sind so viele Rundungen und so viele kleine Details. Und das ist so, ich meine, sie haben es hinbekommen, ne? Ich hätte jetzt auch gesagt, dass Vamedo deutlich einfach ist. Aber ich meine, er sagt, das ist der schwerste Titan, ne?
up being way too big, so I ended up downscaling. I took some time to compare and measure against the other divine beasts this time to ensure the scales would be similar. The end of the tail was pretty simple to get built, but the base of the tail ended up being trickier. Meadow has these sort of plates on its back here, which I just couldn't get to look right. It definitely took some time to figure out. I scrapped the first few designs and started over, getting something better and working on the sides of the tail here, which ended up being like a combination of some spheres. Meanwhile, Toby was working on this ring here, which sort of connects the tail to the body and the wings. The tail was now done, except for the underside.
Muss man bei Vamedo auch wieder nur die eine Seite bauen und kann dann copy-pasten, also quasi spiegeln, dass man nur eine Hälfte bauen muss? Wahrscheinlich schon,
Toby
oder?
and I began to outline the wings, which actually went pretty smoothly. The only tricky part was figuring out the scale in comparison to the tail, as I was scared that they would feel too big or too small. Toby added the feathers on the wings while I was offline, and the next day I returned to properly design the wings. The sides of them took a lot of messing around with the shapes, but I left the underside for later. Up top, I added in the fan on the end of the wing and built up the stone ruins that act as the Windblight boss arena. As for the back of the bird, it was just a simple design around the main terminal. I did not want to build the underside of the bird yet, so I built up Meadow's neck in preparation for the head. The head ended up being the most fun part of the beast, and it wasn't as difficult to outline as I first thought it
Wie
would
man es
be.
einfach jetzt schon erkennt, ne? Nur von der Form. Du erkennst genau, was es werden soll.
The biggest problem was just figuring out the length of the beak. For some reason, the scaling with this divine beast seemed a lot more difficult and important than the other two we've built. I think the head ended up looking really good in the end though. I then came back to do the underside of the wings, which only really had this room hanging below and these 5 windows. The real tricky part was up next, as it was time to build the legs. The legs themselves weren't actually too bad, it was only the claws that caused issues. Ombrains, Ezio, and Alfie were there to help though, and we went through a few different designs for the claws before settling on this blocky version, as I felt like the stairs and slabs were making it look too rounded in comparison to Breath of the Wild. To finish off the exterior, Ezio helped me finish up the belly, which didn't end up being too much work. I also realized that I had forgotten about the propellers, so I had to build up those too. Moving inside, this was the most spacious interior I had to work with for any of the divine beasts. I swept through the main room quickly, and the end of the build was in sight. With the main room complete, I started on the interior of the wings with the help of Goat. It wasn't anything too crazy, and we finished quickly before moving on to the next wing, which ended up being even simpler. As a final touch, Haoziki came in to work his command block magic, making it so that the fans actually propel you upwards when you jump in them. And with that, the build was complete.
Oh mein Gott. Das ist immer das Beste, das Cinematic am Ende. Ja, der ist mega geil. Der Kopf von diesem Drachen ist geisteskrank. Yo. Crazy stuff. Ich sag's euch, dieser Drache, der ist mein Highlight. So beeindruckend. So beeindruckend. Mega. Absolut mega. Richtig stark.
After a long wait, another episode of Breath of the Wild in Minecraft is over. This region was filled with some of the most fun parts of the project, and some of the worst yet. But of course, right when I started editing this video, I got sick and was unable to edit for an entire week. I suppose it's just one last middle finger from this episode. I won't even bother giving an estimate on when the next one's coming, because I've never been right. Next time, we're going to be doing Eldin and probably Akala in the same episode, but we'll save the Lost Woods.
Ich bin so gespannt auf den Vulkan, ne? Weil prinzipiell finde ich, wenn du, egal was du in Minecraft baust, sobald Lava vorkommt, sieht's immer fett aus.
For the final episode with Hyrule Castle. But I've got nothing more for you guys, so I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next one.
Sehr cool. Wie immer, Freunde, Link ist in der Beschreibung, falls ihr die alten Folgen noch nicht kennt. Also absolute Empfehlung, wirklich. Ich verlinke euch mal hier oben eine. Und ansonsten würde ich sagen, abonniert gerne den Kanal, wenn ihr auch mitbekommen wollt, wann die nächste Folge kommt. Oder abonniert Grazzy. Und bis zum nächsten Mal.